Millionaire found his missing daughter serving coffee. She leaves a note that made him cry. Before we dive into this story, comment below, where in the world are you watching from? Subscribe and turn on notification to see more emotional stories. Edward Sinclair wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of rich that made headlines. His name carved into glass towers across the city. His real estate empire stretched from coast to coast. When people talked about success, they pointed to him. But behind the marble walls of his mansion, behind the fleet of cars and endless bank accounts, Edward was a broken man. 5 years ago, cancer had stolen his wife. Left him alone with their daughter, Sophia. She was 12 now. His whole world. Yet somehow, he was losing her too. While Edward built his empire, Sophia lived in a different world entirely. A world where her mother's laugh still echoed in the kitchen. Where paintbrushes held more magic than bank accounts. Where her guitar strings sang the lullabies her mother used to hum. Every corner of that mansion held memories. The piano bench where her mother taught her first chords. The art room where they painted together on rainy afternoons. The garden where they picked flowers and talked about dreams. Edward saw these spaces as rooms to maintain. Sophia saw them as sacred ground. After her mother died, Edward threw himself into work. 16-hour days became his normal. Board meetings replaced bedtime stories. Business trips replaced family dinners. He thought he was providing for their future. Sophia felt like she was living alone. When Edward finally came home, exhausted and distant, Sophia would show him her paintings. He'd glance up from his phone, nod, and say, "That's nice, sweetheart." When she played her guitar, he'd ask her to keep it down because he had calls to make. She wasn't asking for much. Just for him to see her. Really see her. Instead, Edward came home one day with brochures. Glossy pictures of stone buildings and perfectly manicured lawns. Westfield Academy. The best boarding school money could buy. "This is your future," he said, spreading the papers across the dining table. "The connections you'll make here will set you up for life." Sophia stared at those brochures like they were poison. All she could think was, "He wants me gone. He wants to erase everything that reminds him of Mom. He wants to turn me into someone else." "I don't want to go," she whispered. Edward didn't hear the fear in her voice. He heard defiance. "You don't understand what this opportunity means." "I understand perfectly," Sophia shot back. "You want me out of your way." The weeks that followed were torture. Edward pushed harder about the school. Sophia dug in deeper. She stopped showing him her art. Stopped playing guitar when he was home. The mansion felt like a prison where two people walked past each other like strangers. She felt invisible. Like her thoughts didn't matter. Her dreams didn't count. Her pain over losing her mother was just something to be managed and solved with the right school and the right connections. That stormy night, when Edward laid out his final ultimatum about Westfield Academy, something inside Sophia snapped. Not just anger. Desperation. The feeling that if she didn't fight for herself now, she'd disappear completely. So she made a choice that changed everything. She packed light. A few clothes. Her mother's jewelry box. And most importantly, her guitar. That guitar wasn't just an instrument. It was her voice when words failed. Her connection to everything she was losing. By dawn, she was gone. Not just running away from something. Running toward the chance to prove she existed on her own terms. That she mattered. That her life had value beyond Edward's plans for her future. But 12-year-olds don't realize how big and dangerous the world can be. Or how much they'll miss home once they're truly alone. The first thing Edward did was call the police. Then private investigators. Then anyone who would listen. Missing child posters appeared on every street corner. Her face stared back from bus stops and store windows. The local news ran her story every night. Edward's voice cracked during interviews, begging anyone with information to come forward. But Sophia had vanished like smoke. Weeks passed. The investigators brought him false leads that led nowhere. A girl matching her description spotted 3 states away. A guitar case found abandoned in a park. Each hope crushed him a little more. The mansion became a tomb. Edward walked through rooms that still smelled like her shampoo. Her art supply sat untouched on her desk. Her bed remained perfectly made, waiting for her return. For the first time in years, Edward couldn't focus on work. Board meetings felt meaningless. Contracts sat unsigned on his desk. His empire could crumble and he wouldn't care. Nothing mattered except finding his daughter. But the hardest part wasn't the empty house. It was the crushing weight of understanding. All those nights he'd worked late. All those times he'd dismissed her art as a hobby. All those moments he'd chosen business over bedtime stories. He'd failed her long before she ran away. Meanwhile, 50 miles away, Sophia sat on a bus clutching her guitar case like a lifeline. She'd never been this far from home alone. Every mile felt like crossing into another world. Her savings wouldn't last long. She had no plan beyond getting away from everything that hurt. The bus dropped her in a small town she'd never heard of. Main Street looked like something from a movie. Old-fashioned storefronts. Tree-lined sidewalks. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Which made a 12-year-old girl with a guitar case stand out. Sophia wandered for hours, getting hungrier and more scared. Then she saw it. A cozy coffee shop with warm light spilling from its windows. Brewed Awakenings painted in cheerful letters across the glass. The owner, Mrs. Henderson, looked up when Sophia walked in. Grey hair. Kind eyes. The type of woman who baked cookies for church sales and remembered everyone's birthday. "You look lost, honey," Mrs. Henderson said gently. Sophia's story came out in stammers. She was visiting family. Got separated. Missed her bus. All lies, but Mrs. Henderson nodded like she believed every word. Except her eyes said something different. They said, "I know you're running from something, but I won't push." "I have a small apartment upstairs," Mrs. Henderson offered. "You could stay the night. Help me out in the shop to earn your keep." One night became a week. A week became a month. Sophia learned to wipe tables without leaving streaks. To sweep floors corner to corner. To smile at customers even when her heart felt heavy. Mrs. Henderson taught her to work the espresso machine, to steam milk until it was perfect, to write customers' names on cups with careful letters. The work was simple, but it gave Sophia something she'd never had before. Purpose that belonged to her. Tasks that mattered not because someone else decided they should, but because she made them matter. She was good at it too. Customers started asking for her by name. Regulars would wait for her to make their drinks. For the first time in years, Sophia felt seen. But late at night, in the small apartment above the shop, loneliness crept in. She'd lie in bed thinking about her father. Was he looking for her? Did he even notice she was gone? Or was he relieved to have one less problem to solve? Then one afternoon, everything changed. Two customers sat in the corner booth, voices low but not quite whispered. Sophia was stacking clean mugs when she heard them talking. "Did you see the news about that millionaire? Still searching for his daughter. Been months now. Terrible story. Can't imagine losing a child like that. They say he's offered a huge reward. Private investigators all over the state." The mug in Sophia's hands nearly slipped. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. They were talking about her father. About her. That night, she couldn't sleep. All she could think about was Edward, alone in that big house, searching for her. Maybe he wasn't relieved she was gone. Maybe he was broken. She pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. Words poured out like water through a broken dam. Everything she'd felt but couldn't say. The anger. The loneliness. The fear. But also the love she'd never stopped feeling. She wrote about missing him. About not wanting to go to boarding school. About wanting to be a family again, even though Mom was gone. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and tucked it in her apron pocket. She didn't know why she kept it. Maybe because it felt like holding onto a piece of hope. A hope that somehow, someday, she'd find the courage to give it to him. 3 months into his nightmare, Edward hit his breaking point. The mansion walls felt like they were closing in. Every room whispered Sophia's name. Every shadow looked like her silhouette. The investigators had gone quiet. The leads had dried up. The hope was suffocating him. He needed to get out. Away from the memories. Away from the guilt. Away from everything that reminded him of his failure. Edward grabbed his car keys and drove. No destination. No plan. Just the need to move, to breathe, to exist somewhere that didn't echo with his daughter's absence. Mile after mile rolled past his windshield. The city skyline faded behind him. Suburban neighborhoods gave way to farmland. Farmland gave way to small towns he'd never noticed before. He drove until his gas tank ran low and his mind went numb. The town was nothing special. Main Street, America. The kind of place he'd normally drive through without stopping. But today, something made him pull over. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the simple promise of anonymity. Here, no one would recognize him. No one would whisper about the millionaire who lost his daughter. No one would look at him with pity. He parked in front of a small coffee shop. Brewed Awakenings looked warm and ordinary. Exactly what he needed. A place where he could sit quietly and pretend, for just an hour, that his world hadn't collapsed. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. A few customers sat scattered around small tables. The smell of coffee and baked goods filled the air. Normal. Peaceful. Everything his life wasn't anymore. Edward found a corner table by the window. He sat heavily, staring out at the quiet street. His phone buzzed with business calls he ignored. For the first time in months, work felt meaningless. He was lost in his thoughts when footsteps approached his table. "More coffee, sir?" The voice was young. Polite. He glanced up absently, ready to nod and return to his brooding. Time stopped. The girl standing beside his table had dark hair, slightly shorter than he remembered. An apron that was a size too big. But those eyes. Those unmistakable brown eyes that had looked up at him 1,000 times before. And there, on her left cheek, the small heart-shaped birthmark that had been there since she was born. Edward's breath caught in his throat. His heart hammered against his ribs. The coffee shop seemed to tilt around him. Sophia? The name escaped as barely a whisper. A prayer. A question. A desperate hope that maybe, somehow, this wasn't another cruel dream. The coffee pot in her hand started shaking. The metal clinked against the rim of his cup as she set it down with trembling fingers. Sophia's face went pale. Her eyes wide with shock and something that looked like terror. The carefully built walls of her new life crashing down in an instant. Father and daughter stared at each other across the small table. Two people who had searched for each other in different ways. Two hearts that had been broken by the same fight, the same stubborn love, the same desperate need to be understood. The coffee shop continued its gentle hum around them. Other customers chatted quietly. The espresso machine hissed. Life went on. But for Edward and Sophia, the world had just shifted on its axis. Everything was about to change. For a moment, neither of them moved. The weight of 3 months of separation hung between them like a wall. Then Sophia's hand moved to her apron pocket. Her fingers pulled out a piece of paper, folded so many times it looked fragile. She'd carried it with her every day, through every shift, through every lonely night. A letter she never thought she'd have the courage to give him. Now, with trembling hands, she placed it on the table between them. Edward stared at the folded paper like it might disappear. His hands shook as he reached for it. The simple white paper felt impossibly heavy. He unfolded it slowly. Carefully. As if it contained something sacred. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. The same careful letters she'd used on birthday cards and school projects. But the words cut straight through his heart. Dear Dad. I'm sorry I ran away. I was so mad that night, I felt like you didn't see me, just some plan for my future. I wanted to prove I could do things my way. But it's hard out here, and I miss you. I miss home. Edward's vision blurred. Each word was a punch to his chest. He could hear her voice in every sentence, see her face in every careful letter. I know you're trying to take care of me, even if it doesn't always feel like it. I don't want to go to that school. I just want us to be a family again, like when Mom was here. The tears came then. Hot and unstoppable. Edward's successful business facade cracked completely. Here was his daughter's heart, laid bare on coffee-stained paper. Her fear. Her loneliness. Her desperate need to be seen. I'm sorry I scared you. I love you. Sophia. The note fell from his hands as Edward looked up. Sophia stood there, tears streaming down her face. The brave girl who'd survived months on her own was gone. In her place stood his scared, homesick daughter. I'm so sorry, Edward whispered, his voice breaking completely. I should have listened. I should have seen you. He stood up from his chair, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. 3 months of hurt and fear and love hung in the air between them. Then Edward pulled her into his arms. Sophia collapsed against his chest, sobbing. All the strength she'd built up, all the independence she'd fought for, melted away. She was 12 years old again, needing her father more than anything in the world. Edward held her like she might vanish again. His arms wrapped around her small frame, feeling how thin she'd gotten, how much she'd grown. He buried his face in her hair and breathed in the scent of coffee and the faint trace of her shampoo. You're all that matters to me, he said into her hair. Nothing else. Not the business. Not the money. Nothing. Just you. Sophia's sobs shook both of them. I missed you so much, Dad. I was so scared. But I was too proud to come home. You don't ever have to be scared again, Edward promised. We're going to figure this out together. No more boarding school. No more plans you don't want. We'll find a way. They held each other in the middle of that small coffee shop, two broken pieces finally fitting back together. Other customers glanced over with gentle smiles, understanding that they were witnessing something precious. From behind the counter, Mrs. Henderson watched with tears in her own eyes. She'd known this day would come. Had hoped for it. Had seen the longing in Sophia's face every time someone mentioned missing family. When Edward finally looked up, his face streaked with tears, he met Mrs. Henderson's kind gaze. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for keeping her safe. For taking care of her when I couldn't." Mrs. Henderson wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. "She's a good girl," she said simply. "Just needed her family." Edward wanted to offer her money, a reward, anything to show his gratitude. But Mrs. Henderson waved him off before he could speak. "Seeing you two together is payment enough," she said. Sophia pulled away from her father long enough to hug Mrs. Henderson goodbye. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. "I'll come visit, I promise." "You better," Mrs. Henderson said with a smile. "This old place won't be the same without you." As father and daughter prepared to leave, Edward picked up the note from the table. He folded it carefully and put it in his wallet. Those words had bridged the gap between them. They'd shown him what he'd been too blind to see. His daughter didn't need his plans for her future. She needed his presence in her present. Can you imagine the relief? The guilt? The overwhelming love in that moment? Type family in the comments if this reunion hits you right in the heart. Share this with someone who needs to hear about second chances. The first 20 minutes of the drive home passed in silence. Edward kept glancing in the rearview mirror, afraid Sophia might disappear again. She sat in the passenger seat, her guitar case in her lap, staring out the window at the familiar landscape. Neither of them knew how to begin. 3 months of separation couldn't be erased with one hug. But the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was the quiet of two people catching their breath after a long fall. Finally, Sophia spoke. "I was scared every single day," she said softly. "But I was also proud that I made it work. Does that make sense?" Edward's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "It makes perfect sense. You're braver than I ever was at your age. Braver than I am now. I didn't want you to think I was just being difficult about the school. I wanted you to understand that I have ideas about my life too." "I do understand now," Edward said. "And I'm going to do things differently. No more 16-hour workdays. No more making decisions about your future without asking what you actually want." Sophia turned to look at him. "Really? Really? I'm cutting my schedule in half. Maybe more. I want to hear about your art. I want to listen to you play guitar. I want to know what makes you happy, not what I think should make you happy." For the first time in months, Sophia smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes. "I'd like that. But Dad, I also want you to know that I can handle more than you think. I proved that to myself these past few months. I don't want to be protected from everything." Edward nodded. "You want to be part of the conversation about your own life." "Exactly." They talked for the rest of the drive. Small conversations that felt enormous. Plans that didn't feel like prison sentences. Dreams that weren't dismissed as impossible. By the time they pulled into the mansion's circular driveway, something had shifted between them. They weren't just father and daughter anymore. They were partners in figuring out how to be a family. The front door opened before they even got out of the car. The household staff came rushing out, faces bright with joy and relief. Maria, the housekeeper who had helped raise Sophia, burst into tears the moment she saw her. "Mija, we missed you so much," she said, pulling Sophia into a warm embrace. The groundskeeper grinned from ear to ear. The cook immediately started planning Sophia's favorite dinner. Even the security guard, who rarely showed emotion, had tears in his eyes. The mansion, which had felt like a tomb for months, suddenly buzzed with life again. Edward watched it all, realizing how many people had been affected by Sophia's absence. This wasn't just his house. It was home to people who genuinely cared about his daughter. People who had mourned her disappearance and celebrated her return. "Welcome home, sweetheart," Maria said, wiping her eyes. Edward and Sophia walked through the front door together. The marble floor still gleamed. The expensive artwork still hung on the walls. But everything felt different now. "It looks the same," Sophia said, running her hand along the familiar banister. "But it feels different," Edward finished. They stood in the grand foyer, looking around at the house that had driven them apart and now welcomed them back together. "We have a lot of work to do," Edward said. "Learning how to be a family again. Learning how to talk to each other. Learning how to make this place feel like home instead of just a house." Sophia nodded. "It won't be easy. The best things never are. But we'll do it together this time. No more me making plans for you. No more you feeling like you have to run away to be heard." "Together," Sophia agreed. That evening, they sat in the living room for the first time in years. Not because Edward had a business call or Sophia had homework. Just because they wanted to be in the same room. Sophia played her guitar while Edward listened. Really listened. He asked questions about the songs. About her technique. About the emotions behind the music. Later, she showed him paintings she'd worked on during those months away. Small canvases she'd painted in Mrs. Henderson's apartment. Scenes of the coffee shop. The view from her window. Self-portraits that captured her loneliness and her strength. "They're beautiful," Edward said, and meant it. "You have real talent." "Mom always said that," Sophia replied softly. She was right. And I should have seen it sooner. As they prepared for bed, Edward realized something that would have shocked his business partners. For the first time in years, he hadn't thought about work all day. He hadn't checked his phone for stock prices or missed calls. Instead, he'd been present. Really present. With the person who mattered most. The millionaire had found his missing daughter. But more than that, he'd found his way back to being a father. Edward Sinclair had everything money could buy. But it took losing his daughter to realize what he'd been missing all along. This isn't just a story about a runaway child or a desperate father. It's about the moment when pride breaks down and love breaks through. When apologies become bridges instead of walls. When two people stop talking past each other and start listening to each other's hearts. That folded note in Sophia's apron pocket changed everything. Not because it contained magic words, but because it contained truth. Raw, honest truth about hurt and hope and the kind of love that survives even when we mess everything up. What truly matters at the end of the day? Is it the empires we build, or the connections we nurture? Edward learned that success means nothing if you're successful alone. That being right doesn't matter if you're right and lonely. That the greatest fortune isn't in your bank account, it's in the people who call you family. Sometimes, the greatest strength isn't in standing alone, but in having the courage to reach out, to admit we were wrong, and to hold on tight to the ones we love. Sophia's note made her father cry. But more than that, it made him see. Really see. And sometimes, being seen is all any of us really want. This story reminds us that love can find its way back, even through the darkest times. If you were moved by Edward and Sophia's journey, give this video a massive thumbs up. It tells YouTube this story matters. Let me know in the comments, what part hit you the hardest? And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss the next powerful, real-life story.